Amen. So the story today I would tell you, this is probably one of the more difficult stories that Jesus tells. And the context of the story is, if you have a Bible, open up to Luke chapter 14. But the context of the story is this, is as Jesus is traveling, as his popularity has grown, as he's walking, a large crowd of people are following him. And as he's walking, he's thinking to himself, well, this is a great opportunity to teach them what it means to follow me. And so here is the teaching. As he's walking, he literally stops in his tracks. Jesus turns around to this large group of people, and to this massive following, he delivers this message. Luke chapter 14, starting in verse 26. If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. First lesson learned about Jesus: if he had a church and he was trying to grow a church, he would be a very horrible strategist. I can't imagine this helped the crowd get bigger. You know, on one level, the crowd's growing, and this is good news, right? And you think possibly as the crowd's growing, maybe Jesus should tell the story he told last week, right? We talked about the story of the prodigal son and daughter, a story that broadcasts the love and the grace of God. I mean, he should have done that one, right? Hey, the prodigal, and then, come back next week and bring a friend, and it could have grown and got bigger and bigger. But instead, he looks at this crowd, and he says something that is bound not to make the crowd grow, but if anything, to make the crowd shrink. When I preached on this passage a few years ago, there was an illustration that I used to help us think about this passage. I'm going to use it again because it makes so much sense. But it's an illustration that comes from a man named N.T. Wright. And he says this. So imagine for a moment. Imagine a politician standing up on a soapbox and addressing a crowd. If you're going to vote for me, he says, you're voting to lose your homes and families. You're asking for higher taxes and lower wages. You're deciding in favor of losing all you love best. So come on, who's on my side? Man, the crowd wouldn't even bother heckling him and throwing tomatoes at him. They'd just look at him and be absolutely stunned. They'd be confused. Like, what a bizarre message to get a group of people to want to vote for you and to want to follow you. And I'm sure when some people look at Jesus and they see the hard message of Jesus and following, they're just like, wow, why in the world would I want to do that? Why join something where I'm called to give up all of myself? It makes no sense. That is until you decide to frame it differently. Let me paint a different picture for you. Also comes from N.T. Wright. Instead of a politician, think of a leader of a great expedition forging a way through a high and dangerous mountain pass to bring urgent medical aid to villagers cut off from the rest of the world. If you want to come any further, the leader says, you'll have to leave your packs behind. From here on, the path is too steep to carry all that stuff. And besides, you probably won't find your stuff again. And you'd better send your last postcards home because this is a dangerous route. And it's very likely that several of us won't make it back. Faced with the decision to follow that leader, some will look at the leader. They'll say, okay, thanks. But this cost is a little too high for me. I'm going to turn around now. But there's some people, you see, though, they're going to see that leader and they think, wow, this leader is doing something I believe in. This leader is the type of person I want to follow so badly that I could literally give my whole life to follow this leader and do what this leader is doing. And I think at the end of the day, this is really the perfect picture of Jesus. Because when Jesus came to this earth, as cool as you are, and as much as Jesus wants to hang out with you, he didn't just come to this earth to hang out with you and to be happy. Jesus came to this earth with a very specific calling and a very specific mission. And the mission was this. The Father in heaven said to Jesus, I so love this world that Jesus, I am sending you to this earth. See, when Jesus walked among us, he came with this very simple task, or actually it's a very big task, to demonstrate and to bring the love of his Father to this earth. And when he came among us, he did that in so many ways. One of the beginning calls of his ministry, he took this scroll from Isaiah and he said, listen, I have come to preach good news to the poor and the oppressed. I have come to set prisoners free. It's exactly what Jesus did. He went across lines. He loved the unlovable. When people were blind, he would give them sight. And because of the love of Jesus, people's lives were actually made better. Justice began to reign because of Jesus' life. But ultimately, at the very end of his life, Jesus gave in the ultimate act of love the greatest thing he could give as a part of his mission. And he allowed himself to be put on a cross, where on that cross, he took all of our sin. He took all of our shame. He took everything that could separate any person from God, and he took it to death on the cross. Even death itself is conquered on the cross. Why? That's God's way of saying, I want you to live forever, because the relationship I want to have with you is not just for now, but it's going to go on forever. If you remember last week when we looked at the story of the prodigal son, we talked about who the Father is. Who is the Father? The Father in heaven is the ones whose arms are always wide open. No matter what we do, no matter how far we fall, the Father never turns his back on you. But the Father always has his hands open, and he's saying, please, please come into my arms. So this is the call of discipleship that Jesus asks of us. He says, look at my life. I have aimed my entire life into bringing the love of God into this world. And if you are going to follow me, you have to join me in this mission. But it's not going to be easy. And think about it. This is crazy. Look at this text, right? If you're going to come after me, you need to hate your father, mother, wife, and children, brothers and sisters, even your own life. Now, remember one of the first times I remember reading this as a young believer, and I came across this. I mean, this passage just struck me as kind of strange, right? I mean, how weird. Why would we be called to hate, especially our own family? This seems to run counterintuitive to everything Jesus talks about. I mean, Jesus says, love everybody from your enemy to the people who are close to you. But what Jesus is doing here is making a comparison. He says, listen, in your life, and especially in the Jewish world, what is the group of people that you love the most, that you're the most committed to? And it's the family. It's true back then. In most cases, it's true today. And what Jesus is doing here, he's making a comparison. He's saying, listen, you need to be so committed to me. Your allegiance must be so high that when you compare it to even earthly's greatest allegiance to your family, when you compare, it's like love and hate. He's not saying hate your family, but he's saying in light of how much you must be committed to me, it's almost as if you hate your family. And why in the world would Jesus say something like this? How many of you have ever hiked Half Dome before? A couple of you, few of you. Awesome. My wife has hiked Half Dome. She didn't raise her hand because she's too humble. My wife hiked Half Dome a couple weeks ago. But if you know the Half Dome Trail, which I have not myself fearlessly embarked on, it's roughly 18 miles round trip, correct? The elevation gain is huge. And if you're going to go out on a hike, and let's say you go to Yosemite, like, I want to go on a stroll. I want to have a nice hike and see some nice sights. If you start up the Half Dome Trail, you know what's going to happen to you? You will come to a point when you're just going to stop because the trail is hard and you're going to say, you know what? I'm tired, I'm achy. That was good enough. I'm going to go back. Or you might get to the point when both sides of the trail are dropping almost straight down and you're afraid. You think, there's no way I'm going to walk through that. That's too scary. Or you might get to the part where it's so steep you have to hold the cables on the way up. And you might just say, well, I'm not taking cables. That's so dumb. So how do you get to the top of Half Dome? You can only get to the top of Half Dome if you are fully committed to the end goal of getting to Half Dome. Because if that is not where your sights are set, I guarantee you're not going to just have a lovely stroll to get there. And that's exactly what Jesus is saying about following him. See, he calls us to this mission where we're called to love the world like he does. But the thing about love is costly. Sometimes love is sacrificial. Sometimes love might put us on a cross. And Jesus knows that as he leads us and we're called to follow him, that if we're not fully committed, he's going to ask us to forgive people that we don't want to forgive. He's going to ask us to love our enemies. He's going to ask us to give up resources that actually make a sacrifice in our life. But if we're not fully committed to Jesus and his mission, at this point, we're going to say, well, that's far enough for me. So Jesus says, are you really ready for this? And he wants the crowd to think about it. I mean, he sees all these people. He says, this is awesome, but guys, I want you to think about what you're getting into. And to help people think about it, he gives them two stories, one about a tower and one about a war. So suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. So you'll be a laughing stock. People will look at you like, why didn't you think about the cost of that tower? Now you've wasted all these resources and you have a half-built tower. What's it good for? Story number 2, right after that, he keeps going. He says, or a king is about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he is not able, he will send a delegation while the other is a long way off and will ask for terms of peace. In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything cannot be my disciples. Because listen, he gives two situations where it's very obvious that if you're going to go forth and build a tower, or if you're going to have a war, you must consider the cost. And he says, following me is just like that because the cost is high. I think in some ways, Jesus is doing the people following him a favor. You know, I think he would almost feel bad if they start following him along the way. They're half committed, but then they get up to the trail and Jesus keeps going and says, now we're going to keep going and say, we can't go this way. Jesus is doing them a favor. He said, rather than even starting, why come up just to have to go down? I think one of the points Jesus is making is that halfway discipleship is actually a really, really hard thing. It's very interesting. If you look at some of the things that Jesus says, is that when you follow Jesus, he says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. But see, the problem is, if you decide to follow Jesus and just give him 50%, you will discover that the yoke does not feel easy and the burden will not feel light. It's like this. Right? Imagine you're going up the trail with Jesus and he says, all right, we're going to go forth to the village. You need to leave your stuff behind. But with the stuff you have, with some of the aspirations you have, you think, man, I really like this. I could just throw it in my backpack. It won't be that bad. And then you look at the other stuff that you have, some aspirations or some motives, and you think, man, I cannot give up this car. But I'll just throw it in my backpack. Or I cannot give up this or that. And then you just keep following Jesus. And what you'll discover, the yoke will not be easy and the burden will not be light. And you'll see as you're going up Half Dome, not only could you fall to your death, but you'll have a 50-pound pack holding you down. See, to experience the freedom and the joy and the beautiful help that Jesus gives to those who follow him, we have to leave everything behind. And we have to go forward and give him everything. There's a man named Dietrich Bonhoeffer, extraordinary Christian. He was the type of guy, he committed everything to Christ, and it even eventually ended up costing his life. But he says this, it's really cool, listen up. Only the one who follows the command of Jesus single-mindedly and unresistingly lets his yoke rest upon him finds his burden easy, and under its gentle pressure receives the power to persevere in the right way. The command of Jesus is hard, unutterably hard for those who try and resist it. But for those who willingly submit, the yoke is easy and the burden is light. If you read the scriptures and you see the call of Jesus, it is hard. And as you see to go through this life, we are all going to come to these moments when we say, listen, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this. I can't make it. But you see, when you follow Jesus wholeheartedly, what you discover is every time you say, I can't do it, but I'm going to try anyways, those are the moments when you start to learn what it feels like to be in the presence and the care of Jesus. See, Jesus is faithful. He will never, ever, under any circumstance, let you go. He will always be with you. Why? Number one, because he loves you. But number two, you have to understand the mission that Jesus had in this world did not stop the day he ascended to heaven. But he said, my mission is now your mission, and I entrust it to you. And he's going to be with us every step of the way. See, it's neat as you look through the scriptures and you see the things that Jesus talks about. He'll say things like, hey, I am the light of the world. But then he'll turn around and he'll look at his disciples and say, wait, but you are the light of the world, because you're going to carry on what I started. And sometimes he would even say to his disciples, listen, look at all he's done. You're going to be the salt of the earth, right? Salt is something that gives flavor, that helps preserve something from going bad. He says, you guys are going to be the ones who make things fresh in this world. That is going to be your mission. He's with us, and it's our calling. And then he ends with this as he talks to the group, and he actually talks about salt. He says, listen, salt is good. You're the salt of the earth. But if it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is fit neither for the soil or even a pile of poop, and it is thrown out. This is a hard saying, but what's Jesus saying? He's like, listen, you guys are the hope of this world. I need you to bring the love of the Father to the world that you live in. But listen, the day that you drop the mission, the day when you don't care about my mission anymore and you just want to live for yourself and you just want to be comfortable, this is the day you're no longer salty. And you might as well be thrown out into the poop. Kind of a hard message, but it's a true message. So what does the crowd do when they hear this? Well, like any story of Jesus, the point that he's making is he wants the crowd to start thinking. That's the goal. He wants them to look at their lives and ask the question he poses, am I ready to follow Jesus with everything? Will I count the cost? Will I give him my full commitment? Or do I have other bags and other things that I'm carrying along the way? And what is Jesus' desire? He says, as you look at your life, if you find anything else that you're carrying, please let it go and follow me with everything you have. So what is your commitment level? I won't make you tell me this morning, but I know my commitment level goes like this sometimes. And I need stories like this from Jesus to remind me to stop carrying these other things that I put above God. You know, one of the things that I think is useful is you think about, maybe this morning, about your commitment level. Think about this. What are the types of questions that you ask yourself when you think about how to live in this world? See, when we're living out of a mindset, when we're not fully committed to Jesus, when we look at moral choices or opportunities to love, this is what we say. We say, well, how much can I give, or how much can I do simply to get away with it? How much can I do and have Jesus still be happy with me? And we're not fully committed. That's how we look at morality and the things that Jesus asks us to do. But when Jesus is the first commitment, it changes everything. Instead of asking, well, what can I get away with? I'm saying, wow, for this journey to follow Jesus, man, what can I throw off so that I can go freely, right? It's not a question of how close can I get to the line, but how can I throw everything off to follow Jesus with everything that I have? I look at the decision, this choice I have, and say, listen, if there's even a chance that doing this will hinder my walk with Jesus or hinder the calling on my life, I'm just going to toss it off, say, Jesus, take that, and I'm going to run freely. One of my favorite scriptures comes from the book of Hebrews, chapter 12:1. And the author says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Love that. That's what Jesus wants. Throw it off. Stop holding on to the things that you've been holding tighter than Jesus. If you want to know the faithfulness of Jesus, if you want to know what it means to walk in his presence and enjoy his favor, the only way that you will ever do it is to throw it off and to run forth. Climb the mountain, make his mission your mission, and I promise it will be the best thing that you will ever do with your life. And so, with those words, I'd like to take a moment of reflection this morning. And I hope that as you hear the word of God this morning, it doesn't stop here, but you go home and continue to wrestle with it and say, God, what are you asking me to do? Who are you asking me to be? How are you asking me to follow you? So let's just bow our heads before God. And Jesus, we thank you that as you carried your Father's love into this world, your love knew of no limits. And because of your love, you went to the cross, you paid the price so that every human being could be forgiven and freed, and they would simply turn to you. God, you left us that mission to continue to bring forth your message, to continue to bring forth your love. And God, I know at times for me and some of us here, we have not allowed that to be our ultimate commitment. We've let it be one of our many commitments. And because of that, we've actually discovered that being a Christian is not freeing. It's not easy. It's actually more difficult than it needs to be. And so, Jesus, by your grace, would you help us to leave everything behind? Jesus, we ask that you would be the lifelong commitment that we have. And Lord, we trust you in this. Lord, that as we would walk forth, that you would be faithful, because you care about us and you care about the people that you created in this world.